When Queen Elizabeth II passed, the royal family mourned in public. But away from the cameras, one moment changed everything. Alone in a private suite in Windsor Castle, Camilla, now Queen Consort, was handed the key to a small, velvet-lined box that had been locked for over 6 decades. What she found inside wasn't just shocking. It shattered everything she thought she knew about the crown, her husband, and the woman whose throne she now occupied. The palace was quiet in a way Camilla had never experienced before. Not ceremonial quiet, not respectful silence. This was something heavier, almost watchful, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. An elderly royal aide, someone who had served Elizabeth since before Camilla ever entered the royal orbit, appeared without announcement. He didn't explain why she had been summoned. He only said, softly, that the Queen had left something unfinished. In his hands was a box so ordinary it almost seemed insulting. Deep blue velvet, worn at the corners, no insignia, no crown mark. And yet, the moment Camilla saw it, she felt the weight of rules pressing in from all sides. The box was not part of the official collection. It wasn't listed, logged, or ceremonially transferred. That alone was a violation of everything the monarchy pretended to stand for. Camilla noticed her name written inside the lid in Elizabeth's unmistakable hand. Not lovingly, not warmly, simply, decisively. It was not a gift. It was a summons, and that frightened her more than any jewel ever could. As she lifted the lid, the first thing she realized was that this was no ordinary jewelry box. The velvet lining concealed compartments within compartments, secrets folded inside secrets. There were pieces wrapped not in silk, but in old paper. Letters tucked beneath brooches. Rings pressed into envelopes as if someone had changed their mind at the last possible moment. This wasn't adornment. This was evidence. And suddenly, Elizabeth's lifelong silence no longer felt dignified. It felt deliberate. Camilla's breath caught as she sifted through the contents, her fingers trembling despite years of royal composure. These were not celebratory jewels meant for galas or state dinners. These were pieces that had been hidden on purpose, pieces that carried history so sharp it had been locked away rather than explained. With each discovery, a single question grew louder in her mind. Why had she never been told any of this existed? The deeper she went, the more unsteady she became. She wasn't just holding jewels, she was holding judgments, unspoken decisions Elizabeth had made without consultation, without forgiveness. For decades, Camilla had believed that acceptance into the monarchy came with time, patience, and obedience. But this box suggested something far more unsettling. That no matter how long she waited, some doors had been sealed before she ever arrived. What disturbed her most was not the secrecy, but the intimacy of it. Elizabeth had chosen not to destroy these items. She had preserved them, guarded them, and now, inexplicably, passed them on. That meant intention. That meant consequence. Camilla felt the first sharp sting of betrayal, not loud, not explosive, but quiet and surgical. If this box existed, who else had known? And more painfully, who had chosen not to tell her? She closed the lid slowly, her reflection wavering in the polished surface of the velvet. The crown she now wore suddenly felt heavier, less secure. Because whatever Elizabeth had hidden here, it wasn't finished with her yet. It was waiting. But what began as an inheritance would quickly spiral into a quiet war, because some jewels weren't meant to be worn, and some truths were never meant to surface. These weren't just heirlooms. Inside the box were pieces no royal historian had ever documented. Jewels without official records, designs unlike anything in the Crown archives, and one brooch that bore the emblem of an exiled royal family. The question wasn't just how Elizabeth got them, but why she kept them hidden, even from Charles. Camilla had expected the box to contain a few overlooked family pieces, perhaps sentimental, perhaps inconveniently outdated. But as she began to unwrap the velvet bundles, something felt wrong. Not just unfamiliar, but wrong. The first item she uncovered was an emerald. Not polished, not cut. Raw and jagged, the color so deep it almost appeared black in the low light. No mount, no chain, no clue. A stone this size, this pure, should have had its own place in the official royal registry. Yet it had no tag, no number, no history. It was as if it had never existed. Then came the brooch. Blood-red ruby, so intense it bordered on violet, set in a frame of thorns rather than flowers. It didn't reflect any design Camilla recognized. Not Victorian, not Edwardian, not even the severe modernism of Margaret's era. At its center, a sigil. Faint but deliberate. A crest belonging not to the British monarchy, but to a long-exiled European royal house, one whose downfall had been whispered about, but never formally discussed. The kind of jewel that wasn't passed down, but smuggled out. Camilla's fingers hesitated over the next layer. Black enamel rings, 3 of them. Heavy, unworn, each inscribed on the inside with initials that didn't match any in the Windsor family. These weren't mourning rings. They were exclusionary markers, symbols of someone left out, not remembered. This wasn't family jewelry. It was political, possibly even dangerous. She kept digging. At the bottom of the left side, tucked beneath a crushed lace glove, lay a folded newspaper. Foreign, yellowed, brittle. The language wasn't English. German, maybe, or Hungarian. The date was 1954. It wrapped something tightly, as if even the fabric touching it had to be protected. Inside, to her growing disbelief, was a tiara. Not grand, not even traditionally beautiful, but cold, sharp, almost aggressive in design. Silver mixed with an unfamiliar alloy. The base was lined with black velvet, not royal purple. Its center held no diamond, but a smoky opal pulsing with cloudy fire. She turned it over. No inscription, no documentation, no origin. Camilla sat back, overwhelmed not by splendor, but by silence. These jewels weren't hidden because they were unimportant. They were hidden because they shouldn't have been here at all. Her mind raced. What else had Elizabeth kept locked away? How many stories had been buried with these pieces, their weight measured not in carats, but in consequences? And why, of all people, had they now surfaced for her? What made it worse was the absence of answers. Nothing about these pieces existed in any royal catalogue. Not in the official vaults. Not in the Royal Collection Trust. Not even in private family notes she'd seen over the years. Camilla had been around long enough to know that every piece of jewelry in the monarchy had a paper trail. These didn't. That meant one thing. They were off registry. Unauthorized, unspoken, hidden with purpose. As she began to sift through the bottom of the box, she found something unexpected. Not a jewel, not an ornament, but parchment, folded tightly and sealed. Not in wax, but in tape. Cheap, yellowing tape. Someone had meant to hide whatever was inside. Permanently. And then, beneath the final velvet layer, something colder than gemstones awaited. Something written and far more dangerous than sparkle. Hidden in a compartment beneath the jewels were sealed envelopes, each addressed to no one, but signed by Elizabeth R. Inside, confessions, observations, directives. One, marked with Camilla's name, was not dated, and not meant for kind eyes. Her fingers trembled before she touched the envelope. It sat there, almost too deliberately, as if waiting. Unlike the jewels, mute, cryptic, but still beautiful, this was unmistakably personal. Not a statement of wealth, a statement of judgment. Camilla paused, as if some part of her still believed this was a mistake, that the envelope was meant for someone else, that the name scrawled across the front had been miswritten. But it hadn't. It was hers, plain, underlined, final. Opening it felt like trespassing. Yet the seal broke easily, as if it had long grown tired of staying shut. The paper inside was thick, crisp, and cold to the touch. Elizabeth's handwriting was immediately recognizable, elegant, tight, and deliberate. Not a single word wasted, not a single phrase kind. The first line alone stripped away decades of fragile peace between them. You were never meant to wear the crown, nor my jewels. It wasn't rage. That would have been easier to forgive. It was precision. Every sentence dripped with restraint and calculation, the sort that wounds deeper than fury. Elizabeth had written not to attack, but to deliver a verdict. She spoke of lineage, not love, of public duty, not private feeling, and most damningly, she spoke of Diana, not with affection, but with unease, as though even in death, Diana's shadow remained a problem the monarchy had never solved. The crown, she wrote, is not built for fragility, nor for emotion, and yet we've surrounded it with both. There were references, some cryptic, some hauntingly direct. A passage on Charles, unmistakably critical, dissecting his indecision, his longing to be understood, his failure to lead without leaning. He was shaped by grief, Elizabeth noted, but never learned to govern it. Another line, sharpened like glass. And now, that failure sits beside him, wearing my title. Camilla's breath caught. She tried to read faster, as if outrunning the sting. But it only deepened. Further down, something shifted. Mentions of the lost emeralds, a set of jewels never officially recorded, but often spoken of in whispers. Their whereabouts, according to Elizabeth, had remained unknown since 1982. Another line followed. They resurface at the worst moments. They carry Margaret's defiance, and what she tried, and failed, to destroy. The meaning eluded Camilla, but the tone was unmistakable. Whatever Elizabeth had hidden, it was not out of fear. It was out of control. Control over memory, over history, over the future. And now, that control had been passed, without guidance, without mercy. Camilla sat alone with words that felt more like a reckoning than a letter. Was this meant to push her away from the throne, or force her to deserve it? She felt the tears sting, not out of weakness, but out of sheer emotional exhaustion. This wasn't a warning. It was a posthumous confrontation. A locked-room argument from beyond the grave. For years, she had tried to erase the narrative of mistress-turned-monarch. Now she saw clearly. It had never been erased. It had only been buried, like the box, like the secrets, waiting for the moment someone dared to open it. And perhaps that had always been the plan. Not a gift, not a curse, a test. One she wasn't sure she had passed. And as she stared into the past through ink and fury, Camilla began to suspect that the jewels were more than secrets. They were symbols of silent punishment. Why had Elizabeth hidden an entire emerald parure from the public eye? The set was known only by rumor, a gift from a Russian archduchess, thought to be stolen or destroyed. Yet here it was, glinting with defiance. And beside it, a handwritten note. These are not to be worn, ever. The moment Camilla touched the box within the box, something shifted. The air felt colder, the silence more deliberate. Unlike the other pieces, strange but still familiar, this was different. Ancient, untouched, and wrapped in layers of silk not for protection, but for concealment. She unwrapped it slowly, the fabric resisting, as if reluctant to reveal what it held. And there it was. An emerald parure, necklace, tiara, earrings, and bracelet, all formed in a hue so dark it looked almost black in the dim light. The stones were not lively. They were cold, heavy, and still. It didn't feel like finding jewelry. It felt like unearthing a crime. The note beside it was short and unmistakable in tone. These are not to be worn. Ever. No signature, but Camilla knew whose hand had written it. Elizabeth's pen curled with precision, even in finality. This wasn't royal instruction. It was a warning. And it didn't come from ceremony. It came from fear. As Camilla examined the set, the memory stirred. Faint references from whispered conversations. A Russian duchess, smuggled into Britain during the fall of the Romanovs. A rumored gift to the crown, supposedly lost at sea, or perhaps never accepted at all. The story was fragmented, blurred by time and intentional omission. But here the jewels were, proving it had never been just rumor. The crown had taken them, and hidden them. The question was, why? Then came the other memory, half forgotten but sharp now. A woman in the late 1930s, a guest of the royal household, foreign, elegant, disappeared overnight, with no explanation. It was said she wore emeralds to her last supper at Balmoral. And it was said that night the Queen Mother ordered the East Wing sealed for 3 days. Official records don't mention her name, but this parure might have. Camilla felt the weight of it, less in grams than in ghosts. These were not family heirlooms. They were relics of power acquired in silence. There was no protocol for them, no documentation, no royal order of wear. These were part of what palace insiders called the invisible jewels, pieces that no longer existed because they were too dangerous to acknowledge. Because once worn, they changed things, or ended them. The emeralds shimmered dully in the light, almost as if waiting to be challenged. Camilla stared at them, wondering how many times Elizabeth must have looked at this set and turned away. Why hadn't she destroyed them? Why keep them? Why risk the box being opened at all? Unless it wasn't a matter of trust, unless it was punishment. A reminder to whoever found them next of the consequences of forgetting one's place. Camilla began to understand something chilling. Elizabeth had not feared Camilla wearing the jewels. She had feared what they represented. Foreign blood, betrayal, seduction, collapse. The very things monarchs are raised to silence. Camilla wasn't sure if the parure was cursed, or if the curse was the monarchy's willingness to suppress its own rot. And if the emeralds were never meant to see daylight, what other royal pieces were deliberately buried in silence? Among the pieces was a tray marked with Diana's initials, coldly labeled unworn. These weren't cast-offs. They were warnings, jewels she had seen, held, and rejected. One, a sapphire ring far grander than the one she'd worn publicly, still had her fingerprint preserved in wax. It was the tray that stopped Camilla cold. Of all the shocking discoveries in that box, jewels without records, emeralds with whispered curses, this one was different, personal. Marked not with secrecy, but with silence. DS, engraved at the corner. Beneath it, a collection of pieces that hadn't seen light in years, if ever. Some sparkled as if untouched. Others had dulled with time, clouded by tarnish and neglect. But it was the sapphire ring at the center that drew Camilla in like a vortex. Deeper blue than the ring Diana had worn as her engagement token. Bigger, older, more dangerous in its aura. Around it, a rim of wax, and inside the wax, faint but visible, a fingerprint, delicate, preserved, unmistakably hers. These weren't gifts Diana had declined. They were pieces she had deliberately set aside, chosen not to wear, and perhaps feared. Among the items lay a folded note in Diana's handwriting, not addressed to anyone, just a single sentence. Some things are too loud, even when silent. It wasn't a message. It was a confession, one that felt like it had been left behind for someone to find, eventually. Camilla felt her chest tighten. These jewels hadn't simply been stored away. They had been avoided. One bracelet, wrapped in tissue and marked with an older tag, bore Queen Mary's name. A thick platinum band inlaid with pearls and black diamonds. Known from a single portrait in 1936 and never seen again. Whispers said she had worn it the night her son, Edward VIII, abdicated the throne. The same night, he chose Wallis Simpson. The same night, Queen Mary reportedly declared, "Some jewels are not worn, they are endured." Diana must have known the story, and she had refused to put it on. Camilla moved slowly through the tray, the emotional weight growing heavier with every glance. She had spent years living in the echo of Diana's legend, vilified for her role, silenced by royal protocol, always second to a memory she could never replace. But here was something deeper. Diana hadn't just lived in fear of public scrutiny. She had feared something within the crown itself. Not the people, the artifacts, the bloodlines, the history etched into metal and stone. And standing there now, Camilla wasn't queen consort. She was an intruder in someone else's silence. A silence Diana had never broken. Why? Had she sensed something? An energy? A legacy? An unspoken rule that others ignored? Had she felt what Camilla now felt? That some pieces carried too much grief, too much betrayal, too much hidden power to ever be worn again? The realization hit hard. Camilla hadn't just stepped into a role. She had stepped into a trail Diana had deliberately stopped walking. And these pieces, these unworn relics, were not just relics of personal choice. They were evidence that Diana had known, that she had understood something no one dared speak aloud. But Diana hadn't destroyed them. She left them untouched. Unlike someone else, whose fingerprints were found where they should not have been. Camilla thought she knew everything. But when she confronted Charles, his face went pale. "You were never supposed to see those," he said. In that moment, she realized, this wasn't just a secret Elizabeth had kept from her. It was one her husband had protected for years. The question had been burning inside her since the moment she touched the emerald parure. Since the moment she saw Diana's untouched tray. Since Elizabeth's words cut across her chest like a blade. Why hadn't anyone warned her? Why had no one spoken of the jewels sealed in velvet and dust? That night, after a ceremonial dinner meant to project stability, Camilla waited until they were alone. The palace corridors had emptied, the performance of unity was over, and there was no one left to pretend for. She turned to Charles, calm but unrelenting, and asked him directly, "Did you know?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked down, adjusted his cuff, then his ring, then avoided her eyes entirely. His silence was louder than confession. When he finally spoke, it came as a whisper. "I was told not to." Camilla pressed harder. "Not to open it?" He nodded. "Not to tell me?" Another nod. She felt the air leave her lungs. Then came the truth. or at least the version he was willing to admit. After Diana's death, Elizabeth had called Charles into her private study. She handed him the box, that box, with only one instruction: do not open it unless absolutely necessary. He never asked what necessary meant, and perhaps he never wanted to know. According to Charles, it wasn't just a container of heirlooms. It was, in his words, spiritually toxic. Something Elizabeth considered unstable. Something that shouldn't have been moved, touched, or even remembered. A vault of emotion, guilt, and danger. Camilla stared at him in disbelief, not because he had obeyed, but because he had obeyed without question, without curiosity, without thinking what it might mean for her. "You let me walk into that alone," she said. Her voice didn't rise, but it cut through the room like glass. He didn't deny it, and that hurt more than denial ever could. In that moment, it wasn't Elizabeth's secrecy that stung the most. It was Charles's silence. He had known about the existence of the box. He had touched it, kept it, guarded it like a dormant flame that might one day explode. And yet, not once had he warned her. Not once had he said, "Be careful. There are things in this family we don't speak of." Instead, he let her stumble into it, face the past alone, and wrestle with ghosts he refused to confront himself. What Camilla felt then wasn't just betrayal. It was displacement, as if she had never truly been inside the circle, only orbiting it, allowed in when convenient, pushed out when it mattered. The monarchy had a code, and now she saw how deep it ran. Even marriage didn't break it. And yet, the box had been opened, the spell broken, which meant the curse, if there was one, was now unleashed. Beneath Windsor lies the official Royal Collection vault. But whispers speak of a second, undocumented chamber, where jewels with tainted pasts are sealed under royal decree. Camilla asked to see it. She was told, "It doesn't exist." The next day, a white envelope arrived, no sender, no message, just a black key. No one mentioned it again. Not the archivists, not the advisors, not even Charles. The silence was firm, deliberate, as though the mere question had pierced a boundary never meant to be touched. Camilla had heard the rumors before. Every member of the family had. The Black Vault, a whispered term, never written down. A space off the books, older than Elizabeth herself, where cursed, controversial, or politically volatile items were locked away. Not destroyed, hidden. A royal dumping ground for history's most dangerous accessories. Former staff had spoken of it only in passing, always nervously, as if invoking something that might retaliate. One chambermaid let slip the phrase, "ghost pieces," in a private conversation. 2 weeks later, she was quietly transferred out of Windsor and never seen in service again. A footman once mentioned a tiara that bled when touched. He vanished from the roster the following month. It wasn't just secrecy, it was institutional memory wiped clean. And yet, the vault endured in whispers. Camilla had dismissed the stories for years, but after what she'd uncovered in Elizabeth's private box, the idea no longer felt like fiction. So she asked, carefully, in front of no one, just a single question to the royal registrar. "Is there anything unlisted?" The woman smiled politely, replied, "There is no such chamber, ma'am." The finality of her tone was rehearsed, and Camilla knew what that meant. Denial, delivered too perfectly, is often confirmation. That night, as Camilla prepared for bed, she found a white envelope on her dressing table. It hadn't been delivered, it had been placed. No seal, no writing. Inside, a single item, a key, small, cold, black as ink. No tag, no explanation, but heavy with implication. She held it for a long time before she understood. Someone wanted her to go. Someone wanted her to see. 2 days later, with no escort and no announcement, she descended into the lower archives of Windsor, past the catalogued vaults, past the security checkpoints, past even the royal restoration rooms. She reached a corridor lined with stone, damp and echoless. And there, hidden behind a false panel, was a narrow door, coated in dust, trimmed in iron. The black key fit without resistance. The door creaked open. The vault inside was unlike anything she'd imagined. No order, no light, just a velvet-lined tomb of forgotten power. Tiaras scorched at the edges, necklaces twisted as though someone had tried to tear them apart by hand, chokers with initials etched out, scratched beyond recognition. One glass case held a small coronet, labeled with a tag that read only one word: revoked. Camilla stood in that silence, surrounded by objects the crown had rejected, but couldn't bring itself to destroy. It was not a vault. It was an archive of royal sins. And then her eyes caught something else. One display case pushed to the corner, barely visible through the haze of dust and shadow. On its surface, 2 letters. Nothing more. MD. And suddenly, the mystery turned personal. Princess Margaret was known for rebellion, but few knew she left a message after her death. In a velvet pouch found in the secret vault was a tiara unlike any in royal circulation. Its origin unclear, but its intent unmistakable. Tucked beside it was a sealed card. She'll never wear it. Camilla stood frozen before the case. MD. Margaret's initials, unmistakable, sharp, etched into the glass as if someone wanted the legacy sealed and branded. Inside, the tiara didn't resemble anything from the official collection. No soft curves, no romantic flourishes. It was severe, spiked, unapologetic. Crafted not to sparkle, but to provoke. A crown in name, a weapon in form. Aggressive in its angles, it dared the viewer to ask why it existed, and who it was meant to crown. Margaret had always been the shadow behind Elizabeth's throne. Not in the way of envy, but resistance. Where Elizabeth was duty, Margaret was defiance. She had challenged the system, mocked the traditions, and at times openly questioned the institution they were born into. But beneath the velvet and jewels was something deeper, a sisterhood strained by rank, rivalry, and silence. And here, in this vault of discarded power, Margaret's final rebellion had been buried. The sealed card next to the tiara bore no name, no date. Just 5 handwritten words. She'll never wear it. The implication was not subtle. Margaret had designed this for someone she knew would never be permitted to wear it. Was it Diana? A symbolic gesture to pass the torch to the only other royal woman as scrutinized and suffocated as she had been? Or was it for herself? A crown that would never be sanctioned, for a queen the monarchy refused to acknowledge? Camilla examined the tiara closely and saw something else. Inside, near the base, a tiny inscription, Latin, faint but legible. Noli servire. I will not serve. It wasn't merely a tiara. It was a message, a declaration of war disguised as regalia. And it made sense. Margaret had reportedly commissioned several pieces privately during her lifetime. Jewels never approved, never displayed. Items that flirted with her status but refused to bow to it. This tiara was likely one of them. Too bold for court, too subversive for tradition. And yet, it had survived. Not destroyed, not erased, but hidden. Camilla understood why. Elizabeth must have found it, and in finding it, realized what it symbolized. The act of hiding it wasn't just censorship, it was control. a silencing of Margaret's final word. The monarchy couldn't allow a piece like this to enter circulation. Not because it was too valuable, but because it was too honest. Now, standing in the presence of that truth, Camilla felt herself drawn deeper into a conflict she hadn't started, but couldn't ignore. She was no longer simply unearthing jewels. She was standing in the middle of a cold war between sisters, one that had never ended, only gone underground. And in finding the tiara, she'd unlocked the final move of a long-buried game. The question now wasn't just what these jewels meant, but who they had been kept from, and who they were waiting for. At the very bottom of the secret vault was a crown, small, exquisite, and untouched, not part of any coronation regalia. Camilla reached for it, but stopped. A final note rested beneath. Not for her. Who wrote it remains unknown. But Camilla understood. Some power isn't inherited. It's denied. It was almost hidden, nestled beneath a layer of dust and velvet, forgotten not by accident, but by design. This crown, unlike any in the formal archives, carried no pomp, no history carved into state records. It was too delicate for ceremony, too refined for tradition. Cast in rose gold, glinting with stones not found in any official inventory, alexandrite, spinel, star sapphire, it pulsed with the feeling of something forbidden. It wasn't large, but its presence was enormous. Camilla stood over it, unsure whether to touch it or retreat from it. The note was handwritten, but unsigned. The message was short, deliberate, cruel in its ambiguity. Not for her. No explanation, no context, just a sentence that felt less like a restriction and more like a final verdict. Whoever had written it hadn't needed to name her. The implication was clear. She was the outsider, the placeholder, the one who could wear the jewels, but never embody what they once represented. Camilla had always understood that titles came with performance, but this was something else. A legacy that still resisted her presence, even from beyond the grave. She had walked the long path, from scandal to acceptance, from vilification to reluctant admiration. But now, at the end of that dark corridor, she realized there were still doors that would never open for her. Not fully, not honestly. She looked at the crown and saw not power, but exclusion. A creation so perfect it could have graced the brow of any queen, but had been sealed away like a prophecy never fulfilled. It didn't belong to Elizabeth. It didn't match Margaret's taste. It wasn't Diana's style. So who was it for? Or more dangerously, who wasn't it for? Her mind flashed back to Elizabeth's early reign, the stern face of a young monarch who hadn't wanted the crown but wore it like armor. The quiet whispers of her own doubts, her distant warmth, her unshakable resolve. Camilla saw now that Elizabeth hadn't just been a ruler, she had been a gatekeeper, of legacy, of myth, of belonging. And this crown, hidden away, may have been her final private act of refusal, to say that not all who rise are welcome, that not all who serve are chosen. Camilla's hand hovered over the glass, but never reached beneath it. She couldn't bring herself to claim it. She locked the vault. Slowly. The key trembled between her fingers, not from fear, but from the weight of everything left unsaid. She turned, one last glance over her shoulder, and saw her reflection faintly mirrored in the glass case. No crown, no jewels, just herself. Because in the end, what Camilla found wasn't just jewelry. It was a judgment, and it may follow her forever.